Philadelphia's population exploded in the latter half of the 19th century, starting with the city's consolidation in 1854. Picture a city being transformed by rapid industrialization and a massive wave of immigrants. Every day, people arrive from all over to fill the growing needs of local employers. Between 1870 and 1920, Philadelphia's population was 1/4 foreign-born, compared to Boston, which averaged about 1/3 foreign-born during the same period, and we were dwarfed by the immigrant influx into New York City, which was more than 40%, or the newer northern industrial cities like Chicago and Cleveland, where nearly half of the 1870 census was foreign-born. These newcomers, initially Germans and Irish, but later immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, settled into their own neighborhoods where the sounds and the smells were familiar, hampered by overcrowding, bad sanitation, and a language barrier with the rest of their community. Each group had to build a community with its own churches, schools, and businesses. Competition for jobs and social influence was fierce, and each group gradually built up its own political strength to support their people. Now, rivalries and struggles for power didn't limit themselves to the legal activities of politics and business. Many newcomers struggled to comply within a system that they barely grasped. They even reached deep into Philadelphia's underworld. In neighborhoods across the city, ethnic groups clashed over control of gambling operations, protection, numbers racket, prostitution, and eventually bootlegging. And these criminal enterprises weren't just about making money. They were also about gaining power and influence, sometimes even forging ties with local politicians and the police. The Germans and the Irish were often at the forefront, paving the way for those who followed. Irish criminal gangs were among the earliest organized crime groups in Philadelphia, dating back to the mid-19th century. Their activities included street-level violence, protection rackets, political corruption, control of labor unions. The Irish mobs often clashed with police and rival gangs for dominance over neighborhoods and illicit trades, such as bootlegging during Prohibition. It was mostly the Irish who ran the fire stations, setting up yet other rivalries. I have scheduled a podcast about the nativist riots for May of 2026. Now, unlike the Italians, Irish gangs were less centralized but highly influential, especially in city politics and law enforcement. But don't forget the native-born African Americans, most of whom had roots in the city decades before most white immigrants arrived. Despite their seniority, black Philadelphians faced persistent barriers and were too often still pushed to society's margins, even by newcomers, who were happy to relinquish their roles on the bottom rung of the socioeconomic ladder. Scots, English, French, Germans all assimilated more quickly than other ethnic groups, so they did not have the same need for underground illicit organizations like the Mafia or the Black Hand. Organized crime in the Italian neighborhoods of South Philadelphia can be traced back to the late 19th century. Primarily from southern Italy and Sicily, these new Philadelphians formed tight-knit communities that preserved their traditions and culture while they faced the new challenges of America. Many lived in crowded tenements and worked low-paying jobs. These conditions created an environment where informal networks, often based on shared hometowns or family ties, were vital for survival. In this context, some resorted to illegal activities for economic gain. Small criminal enterprises began to form, initially focused on activities such as extortion, gambling, protection rackets. These early groups were often loosely organized and based on the model of the Black Hand, la mano nera, a term that was used to describe extortion schemes that threatened violence against those who refused to pay protection money. The Black Hand was not a single organization. It was a method of organized extortion practiced by various criminal elements within the Italian community. Letters that demanded money were often signed with a black handprint, and they would be sent to business owners and wealthy individuals. Failure to comply could result in violence or property damage. Now, this period saw a rise in fear and mistrust within the community, as victims were often reluctant to go to the police due to the language barriers and mistrust of authorities. Gambling was a popular pastime among many working-class Philadelphians. It provided a steady income for those willing to operate outside the law. The numbers racket was an informal lottery system that became particularly lucrative. The Irish, Italian, and black gangs vied for dominance over these operations. Control of the numbers meant power, not just financial, but also political, as criminal organizations often forged alliances with local politicians and police to protect their interests. The numbers racket was also known simply as the numbers, policy racket, policy game. Operated by organized crime groups and local gamblers, it provided the form of gambling for working-class communities who often lacked access to legitimate gaming outlets like racetracks and casinos. At its core, the numbers racket allowed individuals to wager a small sum, often as little as a nickel or even a penny, on a three-digit number of their choice. Each day, a winning number was chosen, typically based on a publicly published figure that could not be manipulated by the operators. Now, these winning numbers might be derived from the last digits of the total daily bets at a racetrack, or from the published financial statistics in newspapers, such as the U.S. Treasury balance or the volume of bonds sold on a particular day. It changed every day. Players chose their own lucky three-digit number, and then they placed bets with their local numbers runner, who delivered them to a central banker who managed the day's pool. The typical payout in the numbers racket was around 600 to 1. This meant that for every penny bet, a winning player would receive about $6. A nickel bet could get you $30. That was more than most people made in a week. Some rackets offered slightly lower or higher odds, but 600 to 1 was the common standard. This payout was significantly lower than the mathematical odds of winning, which were 1,000 to 1. So the operators made a nice profit. They were illegal, but the racket provided jobs and income for numbers runners, clerks, and bankers, many of whom might otherwise have struggled to find steady employment. Some racketeers became local celebrities and invested their earnings in community projects or businesses. Law enforcement routinely attempted to crack down on the numbers racket due to its ties to organized crime and the loss of potential tax revenue. Raids and arrests were common, but the game flourished thanks to its simplicity, accessibility, and the trust built between operators and bettors. It really was not until the introduction of state-run lotteries in the 1960s and 70s that the numbers racket finally faded, as legalized lotteries offered the public a safer and regulated means of gambling. Prostitution was another area where ethnic rivalries played out. Brothels and disorderly houses were often concentrated in specific neighborhoods with different ethnic groups controlling their own territories. The largest concentration of brothels was in the so-called Tenderloin district, between 8th and 11th Streets, bounded by Vine and Race. In 1890, there were an estimated 300 brothels located in that neighborhood. Now, of course, these boundaries partially define the footprint of the convention center, tucked in next to Chinatown, which is where you could head if you wanted some opium. See All Bones Considered number 32, about teen angel and Bible instructor May Bibighouse, who died of an opium overdose in 1900. She's also chapter 46 in All Bones Considered 52 Laurel Hill Women. The bawdy houses were usually poorly disguised as hotels or boarding houses, and they had special hourly rates. Irish and German-run establishments competed with those managed by Jewish and Italian operators. Rivalries sometimes erupted into violence as gangs sought to expand their influence or defend their turf. And these conflicts occasionally spilled over into the public sphere, drawing the attention of reformers and law enforcement. But unfortunately, the lines that divided criminal organizations from political machines, from law enforcement, were thin and often hazy. Many police officers and city officials were themselves members of the dominant ethnic groups and participated in or at least tolerated vice operations run by their own communities. This fostered a sense of impunity and perpetuated cycles of violence and retribution between rival groups. Political patronage was common, with criminal leaders delivering votes in exchange for protection and favors. Now, while most rivalries in the underworld were between different European immigrant groups, African Americans and other minorities also played roles in the city's vice economy. However, just as in the real-world economy, they often faced additional discrimination and exclusion, both from the authorities and from other established ethnic gangs. This added another layer of complexity to the city's criminal landscape, as alliances were sometimes formed across ethnic lines for mutual benefit, while at other times violence and prejudice further divided communities. With the passage of the 18th Amendment and the onset of Prohibition in 1920, there was money to be made from the sales of illegal alcohol. In Philadelphia, as in other cities, mafia groups capitalized on this demand and used their established community networks to organize bootlegging operations and gain control over the local alcohol market. Jewish gangs began to rise in prominence in the early 20th century, particularly during Prohibition. They focused on bootlegging, gambling, and loan sharking, and often formed alliances or rivalries with Italians and Irish gangs. Jewish mobsters like Max Boo Boo Hoff became notorious for their roles in the illegal liquor trade. Jewish criminal organizations tended to be tightly knit and entrepreneurial, adapting quickly to new opportunities in the criminal economy. Philadelphia met the challenge of bootleggers head-on when Mayor Freeland hired retired United States Marine Corps General Smedley Butler as Director of Public Safety. He had his work cut out for him. By 1925, there were an estimated 500 police officers on the Philadelphia force. They made 39,000 alcohol-related arrests and closed 2,566 speakeasies in just that calendar year. That's just a little more than 7 per day. I provided a detailed account of Butler's men crashing the Society Masked Ball of the Year in an earlier segment on Joseph Norris Jr. from All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 22. It was part of the podcast episode, The Birds and the Bees. The onset of the Great Depression brought widespread unemployment, bank failures, and severe economic hardship to millions of Americans. As government revenues declined, states and the federal government sought new sources of income to fund relief efforts and public work programs. Prohibition had eliminated a significant source of tax revenue. Before the ban, taxes on alcohol had provided a substantial portion of government income. The loss of these funds became even more critical during the Great Depression, when alternative sources of revenue were scarce. As the economic crisis deepened, public opinion shifted. Many Americans began to see the potential benefits of legalizing and taxing alcohol. Legal alcohol sales could create jobs, stimulate economic activity, and provide much-needed tax revenue for struggling governments. The economic arguments against prohibition gained traction during the early 1930s. Politicians, including President Franklin D. Roosevelt, advocated for repeal as part of broader recovery efforts. The 21st Amendment, ratified December 1933, officially ended prohibition, which allowed alcohol to be legally manufactured and sold again and taxed. With the repeal of prohibition, organized crime groups quickly pivoted to other illegal activities. Their experience in smuggling, bribery, and violence made them well equipped to exploit new opportunities. Chicago's leading mobster Al Capone spent 10 months in Philadelphia prisons from May of 1929 to March of 1930, where he was able to continue his illicit activities through Philadelphia connections. Other major shifts that occurred after the repeal of prohibition. The gangs expanded into gambling. Many organized crime groups turned to illegal gambling operations, including bookmaking, casinos, and the numbers rackets. Narcotics trafficking. Some syndicates began dealing in narcotics, heroin, cocaine, which became increasingly profitable. Labor racketeering. Criminal organizations infiltrated labor unions. They used violence and intimidation to control contracts and extort businesses. Loan sharking and extortion, lending money at exorbitant rates and using threats to collect debts. Prostitution and vice. Syndicates expanded their control over prostitution rings and other vice operations. In this month's All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 79, I'm going to talk about 4 distinct topics that involve this period and Laurel Hill Cemetery. Petito Little Petey Biscotti wanted to work his way into the illegal gambling business, but he was gunned down in an abandoned tea room in a 1938 incident known as the Flag Day Massacre. He is interred at Laurel Hill East Cemetery. Willie Lanzetti, one of 6 notorious brothers named for popes, was gunned down in 1939, his body cremated and his ashes scattered at Laurel Hill West. Victor Babe Andreoli was serving a life sentence as a cop killer when he escaped Eastern State Penitentiary in 1943. Police caught up with him at a local restaurant and shot him dead. He's buried at Laurel Hill West. I will also relay the account of the arsenic widows of South Philadelphia, a bizarre tale of an Italian gang led by a mystical Jew who called himself Rabbi, who were arrested and tried by the Irish Police Department and court system with African-American lawyer Raymond Pace Alexander, now at Laurel Hill West, as one of the defense attorneys. This gang killed somewhere between 30 and 200 people with arsenic in a massive insurance scam in South Philadelphia. And then I will finish the day with a little dessert, the brief anecdote of a man who sold the weapons that were used to gun down former Philadelphian Legs Diamond, and who then was himself killed in a mysterious hit-and-run accident years later. Let's get started.